Hey everyone, welcome to East, the Open Felghana. Why is this episode 0 as you can tell by the title? Well, I'm not going to be doing any real gameplay in this episode. Since this game kind of just starts right off, the PSP version of this game actually has a feature that is the prologue that explains how they got up to this point. So I'm just going to go through this prologue, and that's pretty much what this episode is going to be. So if you don't want to watch this episode 1 should be up really shortly as well. So let's get started. Do you know the name Adol Kristen? Ah, Adol Kristen. He was a swordsman and adventurer born over 1,000 years ago in a small mountain village in northeastern Europa. From his boyhood days to his final years, he surrendered each and every moment of his life to fate, always looking for a new adventure. Tales of his exploits can be found in the histories of almost every world culture, though interpretations do vary quite wildly. For every record that identifies him as a just and virtuous hero, there is another that brands him an emissary of chaos and disorder. Were these divergent accounts the only references available, it would be most difficult to paint an accurate picture of the man. Fortunately, there are other, far more reliable sources of information on the life and times of Adol Kristen. I speak, of course, of his own personal travel logs, which number well over 100. His many adventures have been meticulously chronicled therein, thoroughly detailing every person, place, and event of note. These are not tall tales, but factual accounts. Each volume is comprised of a simple, honest narrative, with an emotional detachment that welcomes personal interpretation. Yet despite Adol's dry and humble candor, all who read of these brave new worlds come away from the experience deeply affected. Indeed, 'tis as if the reader is right there with him, feeling just as he must have felt. The events I shall now recount took place a mere 3 years after Adol Kristen set out on his first adventure. Collectively, these accounts are regarded by scholars as the Felghana archives. I invite you to take up Adol's sword as if it were your own, and allow yourself to become immersed within his words. Our story begins with two travelers standing atop a hill overlooking the ocean. As they stood, the breeze from Siena Bay washed over them, bringing with it the salty scent of the sea. These sights and sounds and smells all mixed together to create a sense of wonderment, reinvigorating their travel-wearied hearts. The younger of the two stood transfixed, staring at the beautiful scenery in front of him. His eyes glinted with vigor and promise. The wind tousled his hair and pulled at his clothes like an eager pet greeting its master. One could scarcely be certain which was brighter, the sun in the sky or the fiery red locks of the man longing for new frontiers. Needless to say, this was Adol Kristen, whose name was already widely renowned from his prior adventures. At the time of our tale, Adol was 19 years old, placing him on the very cusp of boyhood and manhood. His traveling companion was notably older in appearance. He was a buff, burly man with impossible muscles, around the age of 24 or 25. This was, of course, the former thief Dogi. Adol's life was once saved by Dogi, and the two of them became inseparable ever since. They were like kindred spirits, and had journeyed together for around 2 years at this point. One might call them wanderers, for they would go anywhere together on the slightest whim, just to see what destiny had in store. Until a certain chance encounter, however, neither of them had ever even considered returning to Dogi's homeland. "Look over there in the distance. You can see Felghana from here," Dogi explained. He was looking past the shore over the ocean. Adol fixed his eyes on the horizon, where he saw a vague outline of Dogi's birthplace. It seemed far, but still well within reach. Their goal was set 3 months prior when a caravan of traveling merchants visited the town they happened to be passing through. This particular caravan had coincidentally crossed Adol and Dogi's path numerous times, drawing quite a crowd on every occasion. As soon as they'd unload and set up shop, throngs of people would rush in to buy their exotic goods and hear tales of foreign lands. On that fateful day, Adol and Dogi were among the throngs, hoping to learn all they could from the worldliest visitors around. Sadly, the merchants had already been talking with eager townsfolk for hours, and seemed to have tired of endlessly telling their tales. With masses of curious onlookers nipping at their heels, they began making sour faces and complaining loudly of their ill fortunes. "We need to rest, my friends. Before this, we passed through a land called Felghana, where we worked hard but sold nothing." Perhaps feeling guilty at besmirching the name, they continued, addressing the tribulations being faced by the Felghanan people. Apparently, those strange weather and afflictions of unknown cause, production of crops had reached an all-time low. As a result, the cost of living had increased exorbitantly, making the basic necessities of life much harder to come by. "Seemed true enough to us," interjected one of the merchants. "All the plants in the field had an unhealthy yellowish hue. But the peculiar thing is, the trees in nearby woods were all green and vibrant." Something was clearly amiss, but certainly under such conditions, who can blame them for not buying our wares? We quickly set out for greener pastures, quite literally in fact, and here we are, albeit wary from their ordeal. As the merchants recovered from their bout of indiscretion, they moved on to another topic, but Dogi did not. He was clearly perturbed. Adol did not notice this change in Dogi's countenance, however. He had become wholly preoccupied by the merchants for their tales. It wasn't until later that night that Dogi finally spoke up. He revealed to Adol that he had been born and raised in Felghana, in a small town called Redmond. And after leaving Redmond to see the world 8 years prior, he had never once returned to visit. "I kept meaning to," he said, "but I just never got around to it, and now it sounds like that they're really in trouble. Adol, Adol put a finger to Dogi's lips, cutting him off mid-sentence. No more needed to be said. Without a word, Adol nodded his consent. Dogi's expression brightened instantly in that moment. Their next destination had become clear. The following morning, they were to set out on a long journey to the town of Redmond, in the land of Felghana. As the two of them made their way across Europa, Dogi recounted tales of his boyhood, painting an image for Adol to envision. "We've been to a lot of different towns, and some have been really gorgeous, but Redmond trumps them all. The streets are filled with a warmth and energy, unlike any place else in the world, and the local fruits and crafts are the best. The people, too, are about the nicest you'll ever find. They give you the shirts off their backs if you needed them. I was actually orphaned at a young age, so the whole town basically raised me, and never once felt lonely or anything. I always helped out at the inn, and the owner there was kind of like my mother. She really looked out for me. I was a bit of a menace, though. Not too surprising, huh? I always go out and cause trouble and drag all my friends into it. It's all coming back to me. The blacksmith, Adonis, the shopkeeper, Cynthia, and the Stoddard children at the mayor's house. Man, they were little brats like me when I left. Hard to imagine them all grown up. I'll have to make sure to stop in and say hi. After a brief pause, Dogi added one last comment. You know, looking back, I'm really lucky to know all the people I know. You included, Adol. Adol felt the same way and nodded his response to Dogi's compliment. A modest smile stretched across his face. The two of them stared at Siena Bay for just a short while longer before walking down the hill toward the harbor. The road into the port town was well maintained, clearly intended for tourism and trade, but it was also strangely empty. As noontime approached, a small group of horse-drawn covered wagons crossed their path, breaking the day's calming silence. Each wagon was decorated with flags, and the passengers were adorned in unusually colorful garments. For Adol and Dogi, this was a dead giveaway that they encountered a gypsy caravan and fortune tellers, acrobats and such. These were nomadic people who had no home outside their own coaches, and were most renowned for their highly accurate divination. Dogi called out to one of the drivers, and slowly the caravan came to a halt. He asked them if they knew of the troubles in Felghana, and they were indeed aware of the rumors. But sadly, they knew no more than what the traveling merchants had previously revealed. After conversing with them for a short while longer, Dogi suddenly had an idea. He looked over at Adol. Hey Adol, let's say we get our fortune told. Maybe we can find out what's causing all the problems in Felghana that way. Adol nodded his approval and Dogi paid the fortune teller. She was a beautiful young woman with smooth, glossy black hair that tumbled all the way to the small of her back. Without a word, she took a table from the back of her coach, placed it along the roadside, and centered a crystal ball upon it. She then laid her hands on the ball and stared intently into its depths. And in no time at all, it became clear what the fortune teller had borne witness to, something most unholy therein. As Adol, Dogi, and the other gypsies watched, her face gradually drained of color, and her eyes widened with panic. Then small cracks began appearing along the crystal's surface. And all at once, it shattered out into innumerable shards, as if detonated from within. The fortune teller staggered back from the impact, looking like someone had punched her in the face. And then she collapsed in a heap upon the ground. Instantly, the other gypsies rushed to her aid, administering to her wounds. It took a little time for her to regain consciousness. But even back in the safety of the caravan, far from danger, she would not say one word about the horrors she had witnessed. Each time the subject was broached, her face would contort in an expression of pure, uncontrollable, almost primal terror. She would not even speak of other topics. She simply said nothing at all for several minutes. Then she gestured for one of the acrobats to come over and whispered a few words to him. Although loud enough for Adol and Dogi to hear, it was not their language she spoke. The acrobat nodded and approached Dogi. Whatever the fortune teller had seen, it could not be put into words lest it bring forth a cataclysm beyond imagining, he said. All he could add to this explanation was that Adol and Dogi should stay out of Felghana, and he quite vehemently stressed that point. But to this, Adol would not nod his consent. He had known from the start that this was no mere vacation, and had no intention of abandoning his journey out of fear alone. Dogi was of the same mind, and firmly shook his head. The acrobat sighed, knowing he could no more convince these two to stay behind than convince the mountain to stroll away. He returned their money, then joined the rest of the caravan in bowing a polite farewell. The group then made an overly hasty retreat. Shortly thereafter, Adol and Dogi arrived at the nearby port town, where they stayed the night to recuperate from this unpleasantness. The next morning, they chartered a small boat and set off, never looking back. Before long, their destination had come into view. Look, Adol, explained Dogi. There it is, Felghana, the land where I grew up. We're getting really close now. The sun was hidden behind a mountain range far in the distance, dyeing the earth and sky like a eerie shade of crimson. Still, Adol could see the land growing ever nearer. As he stared, he couldn't help but think of that poor fortune teller. Dogi, on the other hand, had a wide-eyed, childlike expression on his face. It's as beautiful as I remember, he said glowingly. Adol simply nodded in silence, never once turning his gaze from the ever-encroaching mass of twilight-hued land before them. It certainly was beautiful, but there was something else about it as well. Adol had a premonition, of sorts. Not all at once, mind you, it was more of a slow realization, dawning on him bit by bit as the boat carried them closer and closer. It felt as if something sinister awaited them in Felghana, and the more Adol stared, the more threatening this new frontier seemed. Almost there, just another hop, skip, and a jump, Adol. As Dogi spoke those words, he began rowing the boat more furiously. It almost seemed to Adol that he was giving chase to his boyhood. Adol shook off his misgivings and forced his arm to row in time with Dogi's enthusiasm, and soon the boat was ashore. It is only at this point that the adventure truly began.